They will try to bury this man. They will steal what he built. They will lock him in a cage for daring to be too powerful. But first, he has to change the world. 1955, Chicago. The South Side smells like rain and old brick and something burning on a stove 3 floors up. A black man walks into a recording studio carrying nothing but a guitar and a sound that doesn't exist yet. The men in the room don't know what's about to happen. Nobody does. Because the sound this man is carrying in his hands, it's never been heard before. Not like this. Not this fast. Not this dangerous. He plugs in. The amp hums. And then, Maybelline. That was the name of the song. And when it went off, it didn't just fill that room. It filled every radio, every jukebox, every car dashboard in America. White teenagers heard it and lost their minds. Their parents heard it and panicked. Radio stations didn't know whether to play it or ban it, but it didn't matter. You couldn't stop it. Nobody could. See, this wasn't just music. This was an invasion. A black man's sound was infiltrating every white household in America. And the gatekeepers? They were terrified because they couldn't control it. They couldn't water it down. It was too raw, too real, too alive. He wasn't asking permission. He wasn't waiting for approval. He kicked the door down with a guitar riff and dared anyone to close it. But here's what they don't tell you. In America, when a black man gets too powerful, they don't applaud. They reload. Before they came for him, he was untouchable. Roll over Beethoven, rock and roll music. Every song was a declaration of war against a system that said a black man's place was in the background. He didn't just write songs. He wrote the blueprint. The guitar intro that grabs you by the throat, he invented that. The showmanship, the stage presence, the rebellion, all him. Every single rock and roll band that came after was building on his foundation. His name was whispered in every recording studio in the world. Young white boys in Liverpool were studying his records like scripture. A kid in Memphis was combing his hair and copying his moves in a mirror. A group of boys in California were rewinding his songs over and over, trying to decode the magic. They all knew. Every single one of them knew where it came from. He was selling out shows. He was on television. He was making white America dance to a black man's rhythm, whether they liked it or not. For the first time, a black artist wasn't just successful, he was dominant. He was the king of a genre he created, and that was unforgivable. The Mann Act, a law written in 1910, supposedly to stop human trafficking, but by the 1950s, it had become a weapon designed for one purpose, to destroy powerful black men. Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion, they used it on him. Now they aimed it at the man who dared to make white America's children dance. They convicted him, threw him in a federal prison. The man who gave America its soundtrack was sitting in a cell while his music played on every radio in the country. Think about that. The whole world is dancing, and the man who made them dance is staring at a concrete wall. And while he sat in that cage, the vultures circled. Because with the king locked away, his kingdom was unguarded, and they were coming for everything. Alan Freed, the white DJ who called himself the father of rock and roll. He didn't father anything. What he did was put his own name as a songwriter on records he didn't write. He took credit for a black man's genius just to spin it on the radio. The Beach Boys, Surfin' USA, millions of records sold. The sound of white California summers. Except the melody? Note for note, it was Sweet Little 16, his song, stolen so blatantly that they eventually had to put his name on it, after the money was made, after the damage was done. And then there was Elvis, The man they crowned the king of rock and roll. He didn't write it. He didn't invent it. He didn't even pretend to. He admitted it. But America needed a white face on a black sound, so they gave him the crown, and the real king rotted in a cell. Every single one of them knew. John Lennon said it. Keith Richards said it. They all pointed back to the same man. But pointing back doesn't pay the bills. Credit without compensation is just a confession with no consequence. He got out, served his time for a crime that wasn't a crime, came back to a world that had moved on. Bands that sounded exactly like him were filling stadiums. His riffs were in every song on the radio. His moves were on every stage. But the money wasn't his. The fame wasn't his. The crown wasn't his. They left him the music and took everything else. His name was Charles Edward Anderson Berry. The world called him Chuck. Chuck Berry, the true king of rock and roll, the man who built the house that Elvis lived in, the man whose guitar spoke a language that every musician on earth still speaks today. They stole his crown. They stole his money. They stole his freedom. But they could never steal the one thing that mattered most, the music. Because every time someone picks up a guitar, every time a chord rings out, every time rock and roll plays anywhere on this earth, that's Chuck Berry. That will always be Chuck Berry. They tried to bury him, but you can't bury a sound. This is Black Stories. Subscribe, because history has a side they don't want you to hear.